Hello and welcome to North Harrow Community Library's series of virtual author talks. We'll be talking to a whole host of amazing authors and uploading those interviews right here to our YouTube channel. So please subscribe to us so that you never have to miss one of our videos. Today we're incredibly lucky to be talking to Yvonne Battle-Felton. Yvonne is the author of the Women's Prize for Fiction Longlisted and Jhalak Prize Shortlisted, Remembered, which is over here. Yvonne writes fiction for children as well as adults, and her short story, So Your Mum is a Superhero, was commended for the Faber Adelin BAME Fab Prize in 2017. She also has 6 non-fiction children's titles forthcoming with Penguin Random House, the first 3 of which are included in Ladybird Tales of Superheroes. Yvonne is also a British Library Eccles Centre Visiting Fellow and lectures in creative writing and creative industries at Sheffield Hallam University. Yvonne's debut novel, Remembered, which will be available for you to borrow by the time this video goes out, is a historical novel set in 1910 in Philadelphia and tells the story of Spring, an emancipated slave forced into a reckoning with her past in order to help her dying son. The Observer said it compares with Toni Morrison's Beloved. The Herald called it a powerful, unapologetic and revealing work of historical fiction, and The Guardian wrote, painful, vital truth resounds in this accomplished work of fiction. Yvonne, thank you so much for agreeing to this talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think I'm just going to dive in with the first question that kind of came to my mind when I was doing some research for this interview. I saw your personal website had the subheading, Why I Write, and I thought maybe we could begin by me asking why you wrote Remembered. What did you want it to be? What did you want to sort of achieve with it? And why did you feel like you had to write it?
I think, so those are great questions. I started writing Remembered I feel like first it started out because I had questions. I wanted to know about the emancipation in the US. I feel like it's something that we don't talk about very often. I was curious about those stories about how people connected. I wanted to read stories about how mothers and their daughters and their sons, how they found one another physically, but also emotionally, because I'm a mom and I'm also a daughter. And so when I look at some of the things that are kind of like horror stories to me, it's like, if I don't know where my kids are at night, or I don't know that they're safe, or where they're laying down their head, then for me, that's terror and that's horror. And so I was looking for like happy endings, and I wanted to see kind of people going through, I knew that people had slavery was traumatic. We don't often get to hear it in that like as trauma. Which is always weird because you hear about other things like people can, be in wars and people can fall down steps and people can like witness all these other things and people call it traumatic. And yet with slavery, they're like, oh no, people were, accustomed to it. That's not the truth. It was traumatic. It was 400 years of terror. So when I look at the emancipation, I was really needing those stories about people finding each other. I knew that it wasn't always easy. When you look at how the US was supposed to be trying to reunite families that it had separated after they were migrating to the US, and they forced them apart, and then they couldn't find family. And this with all this technology and all these resources, they couldn't get families back together. And of course you can't, because when you don't get reliable data separating them, when you force these things, or when you force a baby from their mother or their father, how can they reconnect? And especially when you put these structures and obstacles in the way. So if they were doing that now, I was imagining what were they doing after the emancipation? You're freeing people, but you're putting them still in that same climate where there's people who don't want them to be free. There's still people, those same people who had just enslaved them. Now you're saying, okay, can you help this person? Can you let them know where you sold their children to? Even if the person was cooperative, the name that they had on this plantation might not be the name that they had growing up. And then who knows how long it was in time. So how do you find someone when you can hardly remember what they look like, or just the sound of their voice, and just all these things that I wanted to write about that. But it started out, Remembered started its journey as a book. It was going to be titled Letters to Edward. And it was like, I had that title from the very beginning of like just even thinking about it, which is probably why it was like, no. But but the book was tied to these letters because I wanted like this legacy. So what do you give someone when you kind of can't afford anything? When all you have is your stories, how do you pass those on? And so in my mind, it was like these letters, and they became so important that they actually started blocking the story. because then I had to figure out how one character was going to get the letters, who taught this person to read and write, and then who taught this person to read and write. And it was just taking over like the story in this way. And I kind of, with my thesis supervisor, Jen Ashworth, with her help, I kind of went back to the nuts and bolts of the story and what I wanted to tell, which was about families reuniting after the emancipation. And I wanted to know just that love and like how strong that love is. And also what mothers, that position that parents were forced into, they didn't have a lot of agency. They didn't have a lot of ways to protect their children other than like prayer and hope. And I wanted to see what they might do given what they had. So it definitely started out with questions. And then at some point I was writing it and I was in the UK. So it was my PhD. I wrote Remembered as my PhD project for Lancaster University. And while I was there living in the UK with my family, and I was writing and momming and like just really living my best literary life. And back home in Baltimore, the police killed Freddie Gray. And so it became even more important for me to write this story because I knew going into it, what I wanted was that when people look at my kids, they recognize that these are individuals and they all have individual stories and they all have the right to live long, full, healthy, happy lives. I wanted people to know that those stereotypes they've been holding on to, those racist tropes and oppression, they need to let that go because that's impeding my children's happiness and their health and their children's and all of our successes and happiness. But I wrote it definitely with my kids in mind, and that idea that like, you don't know someone's story, so let's stop judging people and putting like our burdens on other people. When they killed Freddie Gray, I was, I guess, forced to look at that, those parallels with the past and the present. And so then I definitely knew the book had, like, for me, it took on even more meaning and more significance because I needed to write about this brutality and kind of that whole idea of, well, that narrative, that old broken narrative that I feared for my life, or he reached for a gun, or he fit the profile, or in all these narratives that we need to change that are not being disruptive or challenged. So I kind of wanted to look at what that was like. At first, when I wrote it, though, I was never going to say whether or not Edward was involved in, whether he was or wasn't involved. I wasn't going to say, because for me, that wasn't the story. For me, it was, here it is without evidence. This person has been tried on the street by the mob and the police, and he's been beaten, and he's in the hospital. And they actually didn't care if he did it or not. They assumed he did. So, and then like my daughter was reading it, and she was like, "Oh, I want to know." But so yes, it definitely started out with questions for me.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of links to what I was going to ask you next, which is another post that you had on your blog where you were talking about advocacy, and you wrote, "Writing is my form of advocacy. It helps me to make sense of the world around me, picture and plan for a better tomorrow, express how I'm feeling." And I really got a really deep sense of that when I was reading your novel. So when you say writing is your form of advocacy, what do you mean? What does that look like to you, I guess?
It takes a lot of different forms, which for me, I think is really useful because I write a lot of different across mediums and across genres and across audience. So for me, that means sometimes writing stories that other people don't want to necessarily know about. So some people would like us to pretend that slavery never happened or to move on from it. What I never hear them wanting to move on from, though, are like the advances that that slavery made possible. So all that financial infrastructure that it made, that it gave wealth to not just countries, but individual families and people, and also institutions and systems, all of that, we don't really say, well, you know what, let's get rid of this bank because they did this, or let's stop talking about the money that these people have. So they only want to kind of stop talking about the things that make them uncomfortable. I'm here to bring us into those uncomfortable conversations. And I think that fiction can do that because ideally it creates characters that people get to know. I think people are often dismissive of real people. And so if they read it in a newspaper, sometimes people are able to just ignore it. No matter how true the newspaper article is, no matter how beautifully it's written, if it's creative nonfiction and it goes into building the people and their stories as characters, then if certain people don't want to read it, they won't read it. If certain people have assumptions already, they won't read it. Just like there will be people who won't read and remember just because it's about Black characters or slavery or the US or October, like whatever it is, there'll be people to not read about something. I may never reach them. I may reach them by accident. I might reach them through someone else reaching them, or someone else being like, wow, this book really touched me, or these characters is this. And did you know that that other person we were reading about, that we assumed when we read the news and we read that headline, let's not make those assumptions. So I think there's definitely different forms of writing for advocacy. For me, it might be about the themes that I write about. So that might be slavery, but that might also be family. It might be oppression, but it might also be like family dynamics and forgiveness. It might be taking agency or taking responsibility or laying stake, or those ways that we define ourselves and our identity, and also the ways that other people define us. It might also be the power of story to build community, which for me is a really important thing. But I also write for kids, and part of that is about representation, which is a form of advocacy, because one day I might be a grandmother. And I want my grandkids to open up a book and be like, that's right. I can sail. I can be an astronaut. I can fight a dragon. I can mix a potion. All these things that like other kids get to do. I want kids of color to be able to just, whip open a book and get to do it. Yeah, I think I was fortunate because like when I was a kid growing up, if I wasn't in the book, I wrote myself into the book, or just imagined myself there. I really wasn't burdened by the story not having me in there. It was like, here I am. It wasn't until like I would be reading and they'd be like, and so blinked her blue eyes. And I'm like, huh. And then she flicked her blonde hair and I'm like, okay, you know what? So like, but as a kid, I could ignore it and be like, they didn't know any better. As an adult, like trying to read those same stories to my kids, I was like, one, why should I do that? Why would I pay money? Why would I like sit down with my child and read them stories that they're not included in to show them that they can't do these things? No, thank you. Why would I pay for the privilege of like teaching my kids that they can't do something? No, thank you. So I wrote them stories and I made up stories so that they would be the centers of these stories, or that characters that represented them. And they could be diverse characters doing a whole bunch of ridiculous things, or just doing regular everyday things. But I wanted my kids to know possibilities. And I want that for all of our kids and all of our cousins and all of our sisters and nephews and like neighbors, and everybody deserves to see themselves reflected, but also the world reflected, not just their narrow like community, but the world, the wider world, unless they're going to live and work in that same community for the rest of their life, forever and ever. Amen. I want my kids to know that there's no boundaries. So that for me is a form of advocacy. I'm also writing like in my spare time, like I want a game that I want to play. And I also want to see like a show with women my age, like living, laughing, dating, not dating, like all those different things that I feel like we don't get to do. Or if we do them, we're someone's best friend, we're like the minor character in someone else's story. No, thank you. I'm the major character. I'm the main character in my own story. So I want to see some work where I'm the main character on the stage, on the screen. And so I can wait for someone else to do it. But really, can I do that? No. And also when I think about who that someone else might be, like, I really don't want, like, I love my kids dearly, but like my 25-year-old, do I want her writing a story about what she thinks my love life should look like? No, thank you. Like, exactly. So when I look at like, if my life or my story is in someone else's hands, I often say, no, thank you. So until I can say, yes, I want my, like that, this person or this, this organization, this whatever, they keep putting my life on the stage and they do a wonderful job. Or I can like really like imagine myself in these different roles and this really speaks to me in a certain way, then until I can say that, I have to write that.
And sort of thinking about Remembered in the process of writing it, it was reading it, it really felt like a meticulously researched piece of writing. But I can also imagine that research being really difficult, both kind of emotionally, but also practically in terms of actually getting to grips and getting your hands on these like historical documents and pieces of evidence. So what was your experience of sort of researching for the book like?
Well, I think so, because it was for my creative writing PhD, and that is a practice-based PhD. So the writing of it, the things that you learn through the writing of it, that's also research. So I'll talk about that as well. So for me, the writing of it was often painful because for me, I write character-driven prose. And so that's like those choices those characters were making was based on their personality and based on their surroundings and their context and what was possible, their challenges, is based on what they wanted and what they were willing to do to get what they wanted. I learned about those characters through writing their stories and kind of seeing where they went. So I didn't like know exactly where they were going to go. But so for me, that was a form of research. But like, I started writing Tempe first because she was the character that sort of kind of came just to me. And it was kind of like in voices or in like snatches of conversation or sounds, or you hear a song and be like, yeah, I can imagine her moving to this song, or like walking across the space, like to a certain rhythm. And so I got to know her and I started writing her first, and I was writing scenes with her and Edward and Love, and like they had a cabin and they would have like just everyday arguments because it was like all this life is going on around them. She was enslaved, he was free. And it was kind of like, here they are arguing over like, I don't know, who's going to sweep the floor, or like just like everyday things, because although all these other things are going on, people still live and die and breathe and, you know, have babies and fall in and out of love. And I wanted that for them because I think going in, I wanted all of my characters to know at least one form of love, no matter what that was going to be, to know it and to have it. And so I felt like with, I'm trying to think, so now what was the question? Oh, the research part of it. So I felt I loved Tempe because I started to really like get to know her and get to like really care for her. And then one day I had this like, this image in my head of her standing in a doorway, and the doorway was on fire, and it was like fire behind her, and in front of her she was like engulfed except for this beautiful silhouette. And then I knew she was going to die. And it wasn't me saying like, to serve the story, you're gonna, like, it wasn't me doing that. It was just kind of like, yep, she's gonna die, she's not gonna make it. And I was writing that scene and I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like breaking my heart. And then my daughter, she was there, and she came in and she's like, what's the matter? And I'm like, Tempe's dying. And she's like looking around like, and she's like, aren't you killing her? And I'm like, no, my God, like, what kind of person do you think I am? I'm like, I am not killing her. The story in which she's in, like, it was the kind of only way for her story. I couldn't let her go, and that's why she's, you know, she still haunts the book. But so I found like some of the writing of it was quite painful, just the things that my characters were forced to endure. And I guess knowing that people had endured similar things, even if it was, I made like everything up. So the world that they live in is based on my imagination, but also based on some elements of like US history. And so knowing that, well, if this character is going to be free, how was it? Were they going to be sold, or were they going to escape, or were they going to die, or like all these different, there were certain parameters based on that time. So I think that for me was quite painful, knowing that like, what was a happy ending going to look like for them? And then the other part of the research, the reading other texts, it was interesting to me because so like, I found myself reading and rereading some of the slavery narratives. And then also, so I had read I feel like I had read some of the interviews from the Work Progress Administration. I had read some of them, I think, in like glimpses before. And I can't think of like academic reason why. It was just like, I don't know, they were like available. And so I read some of them. I just wanted to. And so, but reading them for research, it was kind of like reading them more in depth. And you notice these patterns and all these, I was reading that a lot of people consider them problematic. And I guess before I wasn't quite sure why, until you read them and then you read the interview questions. And then you're like, these were guided conversations. And when you look at that context where these were older Black emancipated slaves, they might have been enslaved when they were kids. So it might have been 60 years past by the time they were interviewed, and they were interviewed in their homes, sometimes by the people whose families used to enslave them. And so here's that person now coming into your living room or on your porch asking you, so what was slavery like for you? And what can you say? Can you say like, wow, your mother was awful. I couldn't wait to the moment she died because she sold all of my children. She beat me for her husband raping me, like all those different things. Like, it's such a weighted conversation. But then they were also asking these people these questions during the time when they either still couldn't get jobs, they were still struggling, they had been in that racist environment, there was the Jim Crow era. So all these other forms of systemic racism and oppression, like, not really cropped up overnight, but that were strengthened after the emancipation. So it's going, we took you from this and we put you in this, but actually what hasn't changed is the political structures that allowed this are still like just here now. How do you feel? How do you think they feel? And so they were quite problematic. And so reading some of them, it was painful. Also reading about like some of the laws that were enacted so that people couldn't find one another, so that they couldn't travel a certain distance. And then even the ways that they could be re-enslaved. So you look at it, it was just such a horrible experience. And I don't think that people who lived through it don't seem to get that necessarily like that credit for having lived through this ordeal of not just slavery, but I think also the one thing that that comes to mind was slavery was 400 years. I mean, at least, so US slavery. And then imagine what it takes to have hope though. Like to go 400 years, that's generation after generation after generation after generation after generation and another generation. To be like, one day we're gonna be free, and to have that hope, because if you don't have hope, you have nothing. So being able to pass that legacy of hope to someone, it's just, I think it's a very touching and a very moving and a very humbling thing as well. So sometimes when we look at something and we're like, wow, this is such a bad experience. And you're like, actually, if someone can have hope for 400 years, and no one should have to wait 400 years for freedom. That in itself was a travesty. But I'm saying that they did, and that they, survived it. And my God, the people who got to see it. So yeah, there were a lot of, it was a lot of emotion, and it wasn't always just sad. There was anger, there was hurt. There's just the things that people will do to other people. It's often harrowing. But for me, that was also one reason why I knew that certain characters and remembered were never going to get to speak, or only could speak briefly, because I definitely wanted this book to be from my Black characters' perspective. I wanted them to own this book and have the freedom within the pages to tell the story they wanted to tell, without it being told through the plantation owners or through some like an abolitionist or anything like that. I wanted it to be their story. So it was quite empowering in those ways as well.
I think maybe like going into the book a little bit deeper, there are lots of sort of maternal figures in your novel, and some are sort of biological mothers, but most of the people here are kind of mothers who mother other characters, even if they're not kind of blood related. And that theme of motherhood and mothering runs throughout your novel, and is so sort of integral to it. What about that theme makes it so kind of important to you to discuss and talk about?
I think for me, I think it starts with me being a mom. And so like I have a lot of things that I'm proud of. Like I'm so proud of my PhD. Just the whole like Dr. Yvonne Battle-Felton brings me joy. I'm proud of the book. I'm proud of, I moved my family to the UK to do my PhD. I co-hosted a lot of events with a friend of mine and created like community and became part of community. And with all those things, one of the things that I'm most proud of is being a mom. So, and everyone like mothers differently or has different experiences of being a mother. And so, I guess, we're all learning and growing and doing like the best that we can while we do it. And I think I just really wanted to explore that a bit more. But again, it was still that question of, well, I guess there's two questions. One are, how can families reconnect even after these travesties and after these traumas? And I think that's because like, it's that hope that if something bad happens to us, then maybe I can find my kids again, or they can find me, or they'll always know that I love them and that I always want the best for them, no matter where in the world I am or what in the world happens. I want my kids to always know that. And so I guess like part of it was in that, and what can a character do, or will they do when they even maybe don't get a chance to even tell their child that? How can that legacy go on if you don't give a chance to give it to someone? And what might that even look like? So my characters did different things in the name of love. And they did things that often surprised me, and I think surprised some readers, and things that people don't necessarily agree with. And I feel like, okay, that's fine, but also let's look at the system that made them do that. So if we're saying, well, wow, I can't believe that this character would do, I don't want to, like, I'm not sure if people will have read the book. I do encourage you to read it, of course. But so if a character did or did not kill a child in the course of the book or something. It's kind of understanding why that they would have felt like this was the decision they had to make, but also remembering that here they are enslaved by someone else who feels like they have a right to enslave another human being. No one has that right to enslave another human being. But here these people are going, well, the law says, and I know I do this because there are certain laws that should have never been laws. There are certain things that should have never been allowed. But I wanted to look at what someone might do as a mother. And no matter all these different ways that we become mothers, mothering someone, caring for someone, just on the act of love, I was pretty convinced that like families would cobble together just on need. So if you were emancipated and you were like walking down the street heading to somewhere and you saw a child all alone, crying, hungry, I'm pretty sure you'd scoop that child up and you take it with you. Maybe you don't have time to look around. Maybe there's a fire or there's another emergency and you all just have to flee. You're going to flee, but you're going to take that baby with you. And are you going to say, well, we found you on the side of the road? You might, but even if you do, you're going to say, we chose you. Like, you know, maybe this kid wasn't the only one and you only had room for one or two. Like whatever it is, it's these different ways that we mother someone else out of the care we give to them. So it was really important to me to look at those different relationships and the different ways that we form family and that families form just out of circumstances and opportunities and things like that. And I also wanted to look at what will a mother do to save her child. And there are certain things that certain people and certain characters won't do. Like people might say, oh, I killed someone for my child. And they may not mean that. They might mean something close to that or something like, you know, whatever's in bounds or whatever's in laws or, you know, within reason or something like that. And so when a character is in a place where their humanity has been stripped away anyway, and all these other decisions and all these obstacles have been placed in the way, on them, not like because of them or not through them, but on them, then what will they do within those confines? And so I really wanted to just explore that and see where my characters were going to go. So they did do different things and different characters made different choices based on what they needed or what they, how they understood love, how they understood hope and freedom, and what they could do for the people that they loved.
I think when I was reading this, because it's such a kind of cross-generational kind of novel, it was so the relationships between mothers and daughters, and then those daughters and their children, however, you know, whatever way in which they find those children, it was so interesting to kind of look at those relationships. I think that was, for me at least, it was like the heart of the novel. It was the kind of like, what happens when two people look at each other and say, you are family and I will do X, Y, and Z for you, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And the relationship between sisters as well, I always find really fascinating in novels, and I think he did a really great job. So yeah, that's definitely what kind of stuck out for me. A slightly perhaps lighter question, or maybe not actually. What did you find hardest to write in the book? And then what did you find most enjoyable or perhaps easiest to write in the book?
So hardest, so that's really good questions. I wonder if at some points maybe the ending might have been one of the hardest things to write. And I think it was because I knew I wasn't giving readers the endings that they would have wanted, or that some people felt like they would have either needed or wanted. I knew I wasn't going to do that because it wasn't going to be true to the characters. And I think some readers would have wanted like, Spring to find religion in a way that wasn't natural for her or her circumstances either. And I knew she wasn't going to do that. I also knew she wasn't going to be a forgiving character. So she wasn't going to say to people like, you've enslaved me. And then after after enslaving me, now that I'm free, you have put me in the certain positions where I can work and I can only tell you part of my story, the part that you want to hear. And I have to silence all these other things. And you're still oppressing me, but you know what? I forgive you. It wasn't going to be that sort of book. Mm-hmm. So I think I knew all along it was never going to be that. I think resisting, maybe some people wanting that, but also I knew that I wasn't going to, so if the characters didn't know where other characters were, so if they're looking for their mother and they want to know, like, you know, where is she, I was not going to, see, I'm one of those people, like, if I know something or I have a secret, I'm like, oh, here it is, let me tell you. But so for me, it was painful, I guess, in a way, to not be like, well, this is what happened to their mother. or this is what happened to their, like, I wasn't going to do that, because in life, there's so many times when people just can't find each other and there are no clues. There is no one coming in right before, you know, they die saying, oh, and by the way, this is what happened to your baby girl, or this is what, and so I didn't want to put that false sense on the book either. I found it painful to write when Spring died. I'm sorry, when Tempe died, I found that like painful to write. I found those scenes, yeah, like really hard to write. The easiest, I think, probably some of the easiest ones were the ones that aren't even in there because it was like showing that love between Tempe and Edward was just like my soul needed that. Just that, like, it was completely like without bounds. They just 100% loved each other, being in each other's company, doing things for each other. Like the ways that they showed each other love was just like, I love that, like, about them. It also made that, even though those parts aren't in the book, it made it easier to write the parts that are, because like knowing that, okay, this was out of love, and these like me knowing these characters love each other, and so like yeah, it made it easier to write it in that respect. But then I think it also made it like, oh wow, like, even though I was the one who deleted it, so not deleted them, like, well, I so cut from one document and then paste it into another document so that like I still have it, and so it's all really still useful. It was just ways to do it. Something else that was fun to write that wasn't necessarily fun during, but is so much fun now, the newspaper articles.
Right, yeah. They were lots of fun to read just because of those little details, like just the, like the change in voice where you know it's like a real newspaper article, that kind of, it was just really interesting, yeah.
But I found those fun now because I didn't realize that people would have thought that those were real newspaper clippings. And so I'm like, no, I made them up. Like
yeah.
But so that is so much fun then when people are like, wow, there's newspaper clippings, and like and it's so great that you found them, and I found them. Like I used newspapergenerator.com or something like that. And like you put the news in and it pops the news out. But that is more fun than like that. I guess that was that unanticipated fun was when people think it's real and you're like, no, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really real until you're reading the articles and you're like, oh, but that's the book, so sure, that didn't actually happen. Yeah, I like it that you kind of mixed mediums, I guess, to kind of tell the story, because not to kind of spoil anything, but there's a sort of scrapbook, a kind of collection of different ways of different stories, and they're sort of told in different ways as well. So to have the medium newspapers in there as well, kind of, I felt like mixed things up and made things feel very more interesting and sort of multifaceted in a way. So I really enjoyed looking at that.
You know, I was thinking of them as a way that, you know how there's that story that the news will say, mm-hmm. and it's like the headlines and maybe the blurb, this is what happens, but it's only that one perspective. And so the idea was that those stories would kind of do that same thing. They just tell you what the news would tell you was reported on that day. And it misses out on those lived experiences and all those, like those stories. Like, you know, there's days when, like, if you look through the newspaper archives and they'll be like, you know, there was war and it was all these, you know, really magnitude, like big things. But then those things like people being born, or like if you look in those little local newspapers, they might tell you about like who died in what war, and then maybe like who got married in that day, and like who did all these different things. And so it's just that the reminder that so much life happens beyond these headlines that we often don't know, because maybe it's like looking at, well, who gets to tell what story? And so that's what I wanted the book is the character story. And those headlines might be how the news remembers them, but that's not how they would remember themselves.
So as sort of discussed, you have an MA and a PhD in creative writing, and you yourself, you're a lecturer in creative writing and creative industries. So I'm sort of interested in knowing what you think a good education in creative writing looks like. And I don't just mean kind of like a structured degree or whatever, but just in terms of sort of self-educating yourself in creative writing or working on your craft. What do you think makes like a good education in that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And I think it's going to depend on the individual. I think for some people, they will find that they go to a program and that structured program is exactly what they need. And I think other people might find that it's not what they need and that they need either that and something else, or they need that something else. And I think part of it is finding out what kind of learner you are and, you know, what you have time for. So maybe you're doing something else and you're like, I really want to write. And so the first step is kind of like figuring out how you need to learn. Of course, there's things like reading widely, reading books outside of your experience, reading things about things in places that you're interested in, and also reading beyond that and looking at how it's done, like how these books that either entertain you or engage you, how do they do that? Because it's not magic, right? So it's like there's formats and there's structures and things like that, and it's kind of looking at what speaks to you, what are you curious about, and what just really resonates. And even those books that don't speak to you or that, you know, you struggle with, it's looking at, well, why do I struggle with this? Is it the language? Is it the characters? Is it the setting? It just might not be the right story for you, but there's always things that you can learn from it. Look at the tense, look at the narrative voice. And then I think, so it's reading, 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 but while you're also reading, it's writing, writing, writing. And again, because it's not magic, there's things that you can do to study it. So you can, there's videos all over YouTube. And like Future Learn, and there's writing organizations, depending on where in the world you are. Like, so one of my favorite ones are in Liverpool, so Writing on the Wall, and in the North, New Writing North, in London, Apple and Snake. So there's all these different writing organizations around the world. And one thing with COVID is that a lot of people who are doing things locally are now doing things like nationally and globally. And so they're all online. And there are all these resources right now for people to join writers groups. So I think it's important to read and write. It's also important to share your work. So when you're writing, I think there's this idea, some people are like, they can write and the story is perfect and no one has read it yet. So I feel like what that means is it's perfect for you. And you know what it takes for it to resonate for you. And I think that's a start. It's just that also if you're writing, like no one can teach you to write for yourself. Like I can't teach anyone to do a diary entry. I mean, I say that, I mean, I could, but I feel like ethically, if I'm like, you wouldn't be like, if I'm going, well, okay, for $99.99, then you had a diary for yourself. And you're going, okay, today was a good day. And I'm like, let me stop you right there. What did the day smell like? like, and you're going, I don't care about that. You need to teach you to write about, like, so like, I can't teach you to write for you. What someone can do is to teach you to write for another reader, or to help you to even recognize there is a reader, and to help you identify them and find out where there are. There are a lot of techniques to writing, and there's a lot of different styles and different voices. And I think like try them, but also share your work. And that would mean with people that you trust, but not just people who are going to be like, oh, I get it, because they know you. So like for me, when I'm writing something, if I read it in my head, my internal editor, she loves me. I can do no wrong. So like when I write it and I read it in my head, she's like, oh, Yvonne, that if that doesn't have award-winning right over it, and I could be like, it's a recipe. And she's like, I know. It could be a shopping list. And she's like, send that to the New Yorker. No, so like my internal editor, I listen to her, you know, certain times, and in certain times during a draft, I think she's really useful because she'll be like, oh, that's great, keep going. Oh, look at that, another page, yay. And my external editor loves me in a different way. So she's the one where like I read it out loud as if I'm the character. Then I can see the difference or hear the difference between what's on the page and what's in my head. So like, that's really useful. So I know that if I was sending work, I need someone who's a kind of a mix between my internal editor and my external editor, who can be like, they're far enough from being in my head to know that like, if it's not on the page and like, they don't know it, it's because they don't understand it. Whereas if someone's like in your head or in your circle, they might be like, if I describe Right, exactly. If I describe New Jersey to people, like, so I also write creative nonfiction. So if I was writing a personal essay about growing up in New Jersey to like friends that I grew up with, I might be able to talk about a certain area or a certain club we went to, and they know exactly what it was because they were there. So everything doesn't have to be on the page for them to be like, oh, I get it, because they share their memory. If I share it with someone who doesn't share that memory and they're going, I don't see it. I'm not sure either what the story is, or is this a story, or like, or some things are unclear. It's because they don't have that same access. That's great. I need to know how to reach whoever my target audience is. So I think finding a structure that works for you. So it's just like, right now, I want to play the guitar, like the electric guitar, because like in my head I hear these like amazing songs that like have electric guitar, and I'm like, oh, I want to play that. Now I need to take some lessons to be able to play the songs in my head. And so I can get an electric guitar and just play to my heart's content, and if I'm really lucky, I'll come out with something that's like really good that I can like play again. Now to be able to play it again, I'm going to have to learn what the notes were. Otherwise, I'm going, okay, first chord, second chord, third, like, or whatever, which is cool and all, but I'm going to have to write that down so that I can remember it. And so I need like a structure to remember it so I can tie it too, because it's great if I can make that, that first song and it sounds awesome, but it's kind of sucky if I can't play it again because I don't remember how. So if I know the language of the guitar and I know the notes of it, then I can find my way around it again. Now I can watch YouTube videos and I can like listen to music, or I might take some lessons and maybe I will do a group lessons, or maybe I'll do like a small tutor one, or I'm most likely not going to go to a school for it, because for me, it's going to be a hobby. It's something I want to do because I want to do it. If I wanted to do it to make money, or I wanted to do it to try to like, write a song that might speak to someone in another community that would be like, wow, look at the power of music. Well, then I might invest something in it. So that I could do and speak to them in wherever they were in the world. And I feel like writing is a bit like that as well. So there will be people who invest money in it because they can, or because they need to or want to. My PhD was faculty funded, so I had a bursary for that. So one thing that was cool about it was like someone, they invested in my dream, in my book, in my writing, which was definitely helpful. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking of doing an MA or a PhD. And I think there's some undergrad degrees for it that have like scholarships and bursaries. So look into the financing of it, look into see like who might pay for it. But there's also other organizations and writing organizations that might also pay for it. You don't need a degree to write. But I think one thing for me, so for my master's, I have a dual concentration MA in writing for fiction and creative nonfiction. And that's because I started out with fiction and I was going to school. I was momming, working, going to school. I feel like I was doing something else. Can't remember what it was, but I was doing that. And I went to classes, and the classes were in the evening after work, and I think maybe on the weekends. And I was going to class, doing the work, leaving. I could not tell you anybody who was in my classes. Like if we didn't work on a workshop or work on something together, I didn't know their names. Like could not tell you what they were writing or like what they weren't writing, anything about them. I could have walked in the supermarket and someone would have been like, oh, I'm in your class. And I'd have been like, if you say so. And then they had a class, like toward the end of my, the part of it for the fiction, I was getting ready to like finish the program and everything. And they had this class in Florence. It was a 9-day intensive class in Florence, but you had to take a class that you hadn't taken before. And I had taken all the fiction ones. So I took a creative nonfiction one. And while I was there, I feel like that whole experience, like it absolutely changed my life and my approach to education, because I felt like and found that value of community. So like while I was there, I realized like, I mean, that everyone there had a name. They were all writing some really interesting things. Everyone had stories, and not just stories on the page, but stories like in their lives, and like all these different amazing things that brought people to this class. And I grew closer to them and to the writing community. And so after that, I went to Breadloaf in Vermont, which was another writing retreat. I went to the writers workshop for 3 weeks in Iowa, because all these things were like, oh my gosh, like community is such an important thing. And I felt like it was like I was Christopher Columbus discovering something that everybody else knew, which for me was that like community is so important. So it's like once I kind of grabbed onto that, I started doing school completely different. So when I did my PhD, the one thing I can say is I did my PhD. Like every single thing. My goodness, like I had so much fun. Like I was like, there was the enterprise team on like how to start a business. We were there. I did a radio show. I had writers panels. It was a weekly radio show, won awards as well. A friend and I, we had a monthly true story open mic night. We had a monthly literary salon. I was a associate dean. Like it was just all these different things. It was just like community is such a big thing. And so I feel like finding that community, no matter where you find it, is one of those crucial things. No matter how you go about that craft of writing, it's recognizing it is a craft. And there are definitely techniques to strengthen it. And there's things that people do that don't strengthen it, which would be like not sharing your work, not practicing it. So like trying different genres, writing from different points of views, writing different tenses, different places, like all these different ways that we can, I guess, become better at writing. It's like kind of that writing muscle, and you know, you use it. And if you don't use it, then what's going to happen with it? The writing part of it can be like the writing you do in the page, but it could also be like the writing you do while you're thinking, like that whole imagining and just like exploring in your head, well, what might happen and like for me, I write out loud before I type. And so that's like, what does this sound like? And what does this feel like? Because I can connect emotionally to things when I hear them in a way that I don't always connect on the page. And I like to feel something when I write. So if I'm like saying it as if the character and I can hear it in that way, then I can feel it. So but how would I know that if I didn't write, right? Like if I didn't try it, I'd be like guessing. So I think you find a program or a structure that works for you. You create a community. So like if you are somewhere in the world where you're saying, well, there's no writing group, there's no organization, then it looks like somebody has to create it, and it looks like that somebody is you. So you just find some people who, that's even in a way better, because then you can say, well, what do I need from this group? I need it to be this many people submitting work, and I need it to be a place where we give feedback, or maybe we write and don't give feedback until like the last, you know, whatever it is. But it's creating those structures that you need, because otherwise it's like you don't kind of write by accident. I know there's a lot of things right now around, like people are, I guess, debating whether or not you need a degree or not. And I think you do need training, and so whatever way you get that training, you do need to acquire skills, and whatever way you do that. It's just like, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can go into the kitchen and be a chef. So I can go in, I can cook, I can feed my family. They may not like everything I make. I might make something really well once, and then because I don't write down a recipe, like not be able to make it in that same way again. There are skills and techniques, there's things that people learn that helps them to make like good food more often than bad food. And so like, and I respect that they have training in that, and whether that was investing time, money, I don't care if they got scholarships, bursaries, like at the end of the day, like nobody cares how you paid for it. And if they do care, if they're not paying for it, then what difference does it make? Like, so it's like, when you go into a show, have never been into a restaurant and said, are you here on a bursary? Like, but so like, it's just investing whatever you can invest in the ways that you can invest to get the skills. But there's so many things online. Libraries have reading groups. You can go to the library and the librarian can help you set up a writing group. Like, I love librarians because I feel like whenever I have questions about something, I just feel like there's always somebody that you can ask who's like, who takes kind of this like, I don't know, this pride in like helping you, where they're like, okay, I don't know the answer, let me find out who can. And you just feel like it's in good hands, because you're like, okay, someone's gonna figure this out. But so yeah, so if you don't have a writing group and you're going, how can I get started as a writer? Go to your library and talk to your librarian, even if it's online or call or something. But there are people who can help you find those resources. At the end of the day, the person who's going to make you a stronger writer is you.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, our library does have a book club, and as well, you know, just putting out there, if anyone would like a book club to listen to and to think and talk about books, that could be helpful too. Yeah. I love the fact that in our library, none of us, we're all volunteers, so none of us are trained librarians, but we have that same instinct that you were sort of flagging up, where we're like, we don't know the answer, but we will find someone who does know, and then we just disperse. And we will find someone who has the answer to whatever obscure question you have. And I think that's what makes a librarian. It's not like the training or knowing the Dewey Decimal System. It's that spirit of kind of curiosity and wanting to help people. I feel like that's all you technically really need to be a librarian or volunteer at a library. Yeah. I think I just wanted to ask also kind of what your publishing journey was like as well, because I know it's very different for lots of different authors, and no one really has that same kind of journey from writing the book to getting it published. So what was yours like?
So for me, you're right, there is no one set publishing path. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so like mystical for people, because it's like, well, how did this happen? Because there's not like 10 people going, this is exactly how it happened for them. So for mine, it was, I had finished my PhD, and then I submitted Remembered for the Northern Writers Awards run by New Writing North. And I was fortunate enough to have won. And so when I won, I went to the awards dinner, and it was great because they were like, Elise wants to meet you. And I was like, wow, okay. So she was one of the judges, and she is a literary agent. She's now my literary agent as well. So, but that was really great. And even meeting her that night, because she was so passionate about the characters and their story, and not just about the book, but about like my writing career and like what's possible and kind of what's next, even while this was, you know, just finishing, and kind of understanding that like I want to write across so many different forms. There's so many stories that I want to tell, and I do want to be one of those writers. And I think part of that is because at some point you kind of have to be one of those writers, it seems, who does multiple things, but also who does them, you know, quite well and enjoys doing them. And I do want to be one of those writers where it's like, you know, they need to write on the front and the back of the tombstone, like all of my all of my published works. But so she wanted to represent me that day, and I was like, okay, like, can I send you the rest of it, just in case, because like I don't believe in love at first sight. And so I felt like I wanted her to read, like, you know, the whole book before she was like, yeah. So so she read it all, and she still wanted to sign me, and that was great. And so that was how I had my agent. And then she knew the perfect publisher, which was Charmaine Lovegrove with Dialogue Books. And it wasn't the only publisher she sent it to. So I got some lovely rejections as well. And that was the thing about the rejections too. Like they were really touching and really like complimentary. It was just that they either couldn't sell it or they had something similar out and they couldn't sell it. It was very, it was always that reminder, it's a business, like they couldn't sell it. Clear. It maybe the book wasn't for them or anything like that, but it was always like really positive. And we went with Charmaine, and it was amazing. Like it was again that feeling that someone loved the characters and their story, but also investing in me as an author, I think was like, wow, okay. Because I like long-term relationships. So while I don't believe in, you know, love at first sight, I do like long-term relationships, though I have commitment issues in life, but I think I make up for them by liking to do long-term relationships in community. That's what I'm going with. But anyway, so so that was all like, it was an interesting experience because Dialogue Books was also kind of launching. And so like I went to their launch without even understanding, like it was their launch of their imprint. So they're within Little Brown Hachette. So it was just like a really exciting time to work with them. And so because you do feel like you're a part of a family when you're with them, and that's great. And so Dialogue has the UK and I think it's UK, maybe Commonwealth, and worldwide rights except for, well, only in English, except for the US and the UK. I'm sorry, US and Canada. And so the book was published February 2019 in the UK. And then it was acquired by, so we sold it to Blackstone Publishing in the US and Canada. And it was published there also in February, which is kind of cool. So February 2020. And so that one, I'm doing like this, like it's over here. You can't even see my hand. So in the US, it was like, I guess like everybody, it's just a different experience, really, like house to house. But so I did a launch in the UK. I didn't get to do a US launch. I was meant to go there in December for another project, and I was hoping to set up a launch while I was there. It was going to be in New York, but of course, like COVID, and nobody's like doing stuff like that right now. So I did an online launch for my book. And I'm doing another one. But anyway, so then, but I also got to do, so the US version has an audiobook, and I was able to narrate. I had to audition. So I auditioned for the part to narrate my audiobook. And I like that you're laughing at it, because I know at first I wasn't sure how to take that, because I was like,
I'm just like imagining the notes they might give you. Like, I don't think you really get this character, and you're kind of there like, well, I wrote her.
Well, you know, so they said it was very close to how they imagined it to sound when I did my audition. But they also said like they would, if I were to agree to do like voice acting lessons, then they would do it, which was fine because I had done voiceovers, but I hadn't done voice acting. So when I do voiceovers, it's actually just me. And I don't pretend to do it. Like I know I was doing some commercial for like something, and it was, I didn't get the role, but it was like they wanted you to be excited about like cough syrup or something. And I can count the times in my life that I've been excited about cough syrup. And I feel like, so even during that commercial, I just couldn't like magic it up. It was just like, cough syrup. Like, I don't even know. So like, I'm not an actor. Like people train to be actors. So to do the narrating, it was great because I had a voiceover coach, and she was amazing. Jamie was like, okay, so what are they feeling? And it would be a character who had like there's a scene when Ella is in the church, and there's an older woman who's impatient, and she's just like, hush. And I feel like that might be all she gets to say. Like actually, she might get one other line, but I'm not sure she does. I know she gets to tell her to like hush. And I probably just like read it, and she was like, okay, so what is she thinking? And I'm like, she's thinking like, you know, like how's this disrespectful girl gonna be sitting here and, you know, in this church in this moment, and here I am like 80 years old, and like I have nothing but time. Like all these different things that she would have been thinking, but of course it wasn't in the book because she got that one line. And then you like never see her again anyway. But it was really important to know, because if someone is listening to it and they're looking for the tone and like all these different things, so it really was really useful to work with a voice acting coach to be able to like go through. For me though, it was interesting because I had so the voiceover work that I've done, I didn't initiate it. And so it was like through another company, and they had, so they had the script, and they would be like, here's the script. So for this, it was my book. And so they were like, can I send them like the PDF copy? And then also, can I take notes? Like, so any of the voice notes that I needed to remember, like anything. Like when I'm reading publicly, I do have notes on there, like to remind myself to smile, or I'll be like, oh, you look lovely, or I love you. Like all these just little things, because nobody's gonna read this, it's mine. So for this, they said like, you know, can you send it to them? Like if I could send it to them, and they were gonna put it on the iPad for me. So again, I figured these are my notes. So you can imagine, it's like 300 pages, and I wouldn't be me if I didn't have notes in it for myself. So like, I was going through, and there were notes about the characters and what they were feeling, or like, you know, if someone was going to be upset or sad, or like even just things like they're annoyed, and like reminders to stress certain things, reminders to breathe, and then of course reminders that I love me, and that I'm amazing, and how exciting this is, and how beautiful I am. And then the person reading, like they set up the notes on the iPad, and I never thought about like, I mean, you know how you get a file, you open it, and you like, no, that they read it, so that they're reading it along with you, which makes total sense when they say it. You're just like, oh yeah. So he was like, wow, I've never quite seen notes like these. And I was like, wait, you can see the notes. And he was like, yeah, so that's how I know where you are. Like when I'm reading it apart, which of course it made total sense once he said it. But I was like, oh, yeah, what are you gonna do? It was already there. It wasn't like I was gonna be like, let me send you another one. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. And he's like, no, I mean, they're working. Like, so, so that was my publishing path, from award to to meeting the publishers, to having my agent has a co-agent, well, was working with a company that had co-agents so they could do the US deal. One thing that was important to me with agent wise, I always felt like I wanted to have an agent in the same place I was, like geographically, not necessarily like I was in Lancaster and I didn't need the person to be in Lancaster, but I felt like I wanted to have the person like in the UK to like have coffee. Because in my head, like that's what you do with your agent. Like you get together for like coffee. And I wanted it to be like, you know, realistic that we could kind of do that. And so I was really fortunate, I think, to work with Elise and to have that like supportive experience. And working with Charmaine, we went out to lunch for our celebratory lunch, even before like we signed the papers. So like I wouldn't have gotten that experience, I think, any other way. And so it was just, I think I've had a really good publishing experience so far.
It feels like you went into this sort of publishing journey with your eyes open and knowing exactly what you wanted and sort of like making sure that you got it.
No, not exactly.
No, okay.
No. Well, I knew the coffee. The things I didn't know were like, I think about marketing and promotion. Like I didn't know to say, I guess maybe if there was a certain festival or something I wanted, I didn't know to either ask the publicist to try that out. And so like I learned that like, okay, you either have to ask or you have to contact that festival. So I think personality wise, some of the things I am learning is, one, it's like you're working within a team and it's kind of like different people are assigned different roles and like they have allotted time to do it. And then when they don't have that time to do it, it's like looking as a writer, it's you as a business. And so it's saying, okay, here's my book, which is your product. And it's always you like doing the marketing of it. So when I think a lot of things that I'm learning, I think as I go along, are that there's some things that you trust the team with and other things that you are the team for. So like if you look like after the book has come out and you're like, so my publicist will always be like, if somebody contacts them, they'll always, you know, give information or, you know, pass it on to me or whatever. Things that I might want to do, I might have to be the one to contact an organization. And so now I'm like, I'm not shy about it. I'm just like, hi, I'm Yvonne and this is what I do. And this is about the book. And do you want me to send you the book? Because it's just realizing that, okay, you know what? The book has now been out in the UK for a year. Not everyone has read it. And I think on some hands you think, okay, well, some people haven't read it because they didn't want to. And actually some people haven't read your book because they don't know it exists. So it could be out 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and like, they just don't know. You know how many books are in the library and people maybe don't know this particular one is in there. So it's kind of like, I need to be my book's advocate. So I do contact, and in the US especially, because like I'm, you know, not there, and like how am I going to reach people over there, because I still want that sense of community. So for me it's like I guess I don't have the patience to wait for someone to stumble upon me either, because like, my gosh, like just can you imagine like waiting for somebody to find you? Like it's like you're playing hide and seek, like publisher hide and seek, and nobody knows you're playing. like you're doing it and nobody's like seeking. But so rather than doing that, no, I feel like I have to be like just to contact people. I try to be strategic about it, and so realizing I'm just one person, and if I say like I want to do something in the US, it's a big country, and so it's like trying to say, well, where in the US do I want to do it? For me, luckily, I can say, okay, you know, what if it's in New Jersey because I was raised there, or Philly because I was born there, or Maryland because I lived there. And if I start out with those 3 states, and then I can kind of like work my way out, or maybe maybe if I start out from those 3 and then word of mouth can maybe do some of the other ones for me, then that might be, I think for me, a way to strategically do it. Otherwise, I'm just like throwing a ball to the country and being like, anybody gonna catch? Anybody gonna throw it back? I'm like, I don't have the sort of patience.
And so talking about like publicity and marketing your work, you have lots of like really great events planned for the next couple of months, including your birthday book club, which I'm going to leave a link to in the information box below. And you've got like actors reading at the event and things like that, and like a menu. It sounds really, really fabulous and so exciting. But do you have like other events? Is that other stuff that you're working on? Are you working on other things for Remembered, or, you know, what kind of projects do you have coming up?
Well, that's another great question. So the book, let's see. So for Remembered in February, again, so it's something about me in February's. So one thing is that February is Black History Month in the US. And so that's why I wanted the book to come out in February. But the paperback, I've just discovered, is also coming out this February. And so I thought, what a cool way to launch the paperback is to do this event I'm calling Audiobook Live, which is actors reading out different parts of Remembered as an audiobook. I want them to be dressed though, like in character, even though it's for an audiobook like performance. But I just think it's an interesting way to bring a story to life and to kind of imagine what these characters might look like. I might also read a few parts because since I did do the audiobook. But so there's that. I'm hoping to launch, I would love to do another monthly literary salon. But that would be showcasing not just me, like other writers, because I love that. I love being told a story. So right now I'm kind of looking at funding and looking into, so what do I want to do? I might be working with an arts organization to develop a podcast. So we will be applying for funding for that, because, you know, everyone should be getting paid for all these things. And I want, that's the reputation I want. And plus, because at the end of the day, I want to have a talk show one day, because apparently, you know, I'm a talker. So, so those are kind of I think the Remembered things will be like events, some international events and some like UK events. Yeah, I think it's all events. I just really want to see my characters come to life. Like one day I'd love to see it made into a film. And so I think the things that I'm doing now are just so that like film production companies are like, hey, that's a good idea. And then I'm also working on my next novel. So that one it's interesting because it's very dark right now. I think that might be a couple of things. Like it started out, it was actually never going to be a happy story though. I started out wondering about, so after the Tulsa race massacre and after similar events that they called in the US the Red Summer, which were around, it was racists and they were going around burning up Black towns, killing people, taking their property. And besides all of that travesty and trauma and murder and terror, I'm also kind of curious about what happened to that land afterwards. So like when you chase someone off the land, then I think legally they say it's abandoned.
Right.
And then the people who chased those people off the land would acquire it then. So the deed hasn't necessarily changed hands, except like, so somebody would know that that land is stolen, right? Mm-hmm. And so even if you go and you say, well, now this is mine, you would think that someone would say, well, how'd you get this? Or wow, there was a fire there, or they would know. So you feel like there was a lot of collaboration like going on, and this was this whole big thing. And I'm just kind of curious about that. Like what happens if somebody comes back now and they're like, actually, this land was in my family for years and then it was stolen. So are they gonna say, well, nobody claimed it then, but who was coming back to claim it right after someone had chased you off? So I was kind of curious about that, but I don't want to write about a real event because I'm not trying to hurt the victims or their families or in that way. Also, I was trying to write it, and then because I like to write complex characters, I got really stuck on, there's these postcards from lynchings in the US that some people have, these postcards, and these postcards are horrific, right? So they had killed someone, they were violently murdered and mutilated, and they took pictures of this as souvenirs. They took parts of the body, they took parts of the clothes, and these were like family functions for these people. And then these people also had, some of them took the pictures, had postcards made, or bought these postcards. So it's a whole industry based on this terrorism. Then these people, like some of them sent these postcards to other people. And I got so hung up on like, what do you write on the back of a postcard with the front of a dead body that you were either there or you did, you somehow, like, what do you write on the back of that? What kind of person does that? And I couldn't find a way to make them human, the people who would attend this as like a celebration and be like, oh, we taught them not to look at white people or not, or to get off the sidewalk when we walk past. Like, and I'm just like, how do I make that human? How do I write this person as a human without seeing what they think? And how do I know what they think without reading these postcards? And so, like, I was so stuck on these postcards, could not find them. And I think I wasn't meant to find them, because once I let it go, I'm like, actually now everybody's like, oh, I have postcards. Like, there's a whole museum in the US that like has these postcards. But anyway, so like I told myself I wasn't gonna write that, but I wanted to write, have you read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson?
Not yet.
I highly recommend it. It's an old short story. I think maybe considered a book, but it's a short story. And it's terror, though. So like, it's this rural American town that has a lottery. So once a year, everyone kind of like throws their lot in, and then the winner.
I have read this.
Yeah.
I just didn't think it was by Shirley Jackson. That's that. Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. But
yeah.
Do keep explaining it for anyone who hasn't read it.
So if you haven't read it, the winner of the lottery, what they win, well, I guess it's like a lifetime award, but I'll let you read it or like watch it on YouTube, because it's on YouTube. I used to assign this back in the US, and I could always tell who didn't read it, because like we were watching it and the ending is the same as in the book, and they'd be like, and I'm like, what'd you expect? Like they were gonna be like, oh, just kidding. But so it's just those things that people will do to other people without even knowing why, or they couldn't remember the origins to it, and they're like, oh, I'm still gonna do it, and like, why? But so I had written a short story, a flash fiction, kind of based on that, of like what it might be if something like that happened today, like in contemporary times. And then I wrote a longer one that was also published by the same publisher, kind of like just digging into it deeper. And then I realized that narrator, though, like I'm still hearing her, like she still has a story, she has more that she wants to say. So when I found that I couldn't write this 1919 story, it's actually partially because I'm still interested in this other character, and also because I think just the whole lockdown, it's kind of brought me back to my roots. And so as a writer, I started out writing his murder mystery. So I think part of that is my response to like that feeling of comfort, kind of going back to where you feel comfortable, that space. And nothing says warm safety like a character dying. No, I was kidding. But I was writing it, and like characters did keep dying, and I'm like, some of the things that they were willing to do to one another are quite shocking. So it's going from like murder mystery to horror. But so I'm still like promoting and like supporting Remembered, and hoping to do book clubs and events and stuff like that. And in the meantime, I'm writing this next novel where these characters are killing one another and like hiding these horrible secrets. I'm not even sure why they're doing it right now, or if they're going to reveal that or not. And they're just kind of like, we're doing it because we can. Like, I think we'll see. And then I'm also writing a children's adventure, a middle grade reader. So those are the things that kind of keep me happy. And then we're still trying to figure out what stories of the story is going to look like now, because we're reluctant to have people doing a live event in a live space, and kind of, well, so what can we do? I think, and we tried it last month with it being online and recorded. The only thing is it loses that Vegas magic. So what we might do is do it online but not recorded, and so that like if you're in the space you get to hear it, and if you're not in the space, that's actually just okay. So yeah.
That all sounds great. I find it really interesting that you write such dark stuff when you seem like such a joyous person, but perhaps that's the only way you can do it. Like, you have to be a joyous person in order to write something really dark, because otherwise you're going to produce something that no one can really physically read. So you've got to bring your like light and your joy to it, because otherwise you have a book that no one can actually stomach. Whereas you produce stuff that's harrowing and important, but also leaves you with hope. So maybe that's the secret. Maybe that's what's happening. That's a special ingredient.
We'll go with that for now, and we'll see.
I think this would perhaps be a good moment to sort of stop and maybe have a reading. And maybe if you could like set up the extract first and then read for us.
Okay. So, interestingly enough, I feel like I need my glasses to read, although it's changing like day to day. But so this is set in 1862. The story does open in 1910, and it's a frame narrative. So the present is 1910 in Philadelphia, and the past is 24 hours. Sorry, it's 24 hours in the present, 1910. And over those 24 hours, we learn about 24 years in the US slaveholding past. So the part I'm reading is in 1862, and we get to hear from the characters from Spring and Tempe when they were young. Just young sisters, alive and hopeful. And in this scene, so the characters have heard about emancipation and the possibilities of emancipation. And some characters believe it and some don't, because of course they've heard about this many times over the years. And they have as much reason to believe it now as they did before. So remember in reading this that I wanted my characters to have love. Mm-hmm. And this scene is probably one of the closest ones that Spring has, or that shows a moment of love for her. So with that, I'm going to start reading. Only the porch is base. It has to be. Anyone fool enough to bound up the creaking wooden step, hop one-legged down the sagging porch, run around the shaky dinner table made up of splintering crates, and risk toppling tin plates and wooden bowls while yelling, "Sanctuary!" and skirting around the ring full of women who had spent hours baking, dusting, cleaning, and boiling, and now only wanted a minute to relax without someone underfoot, deserves to be free from being tagged. Fair is fair. You know the rules, Tempe announces. No hiding in the water. No hiding near the water, I add. No getting dirty, Tempe says. No getting anyone else dirty. No loud yelling, no roughhousing. What can we do? Watson, always grinning, asks. Boy, with all those teeth in your mouth at one time, how do you have room for questions? Tempe teases. Watson flinches. Tempe's going to count to 100. You all run and hide. We'll find you, I say. What if you don't find us before supper? Little Ivy asks. You won't eat, Tempe answers. We'll find you, and if not, I won't eat until we do. I smooth the sprinkling of tears off Ivy's cheek. And if you reach sanctuary, Tempe pauses, winding her arms in wide flourishing circles while I point to the porch. You win. Has anyone ever reached sanctuary? Watson asks. Tempe and I think it over. Nope. I close my eyes and hold a finger up as Tempe counts. 1, 2, 3. The heavy padding of careless feet gives the little ones away. One hides in a nearby tree. One scampers to the edge of the wood, turns and burrows beneath a canopy. 2 hide in tall grass on the side of the house. One heavy-footed one, probably Franklin, stomps behind the house. Another one hides underneath a tin wash tub. One shifts 1 foot to the other. There's always a runner. Please just go hide behind the house. I'm sweaty, and the thought of chasing one of them makes me hotter. What do you think they talk about in there? Tempe asks, somewhere between 25 and 29. Men. Why would they do that? Well, you heard the men. They just talk about the women. I've been practicing my grown-up voice. The men only talk about the women when they want the women to know what they're talking about. How do you know that? I've heard what men talk about when women ain't around. Are y'all even counting? A little voice asks from behind the waste basin. 65, Tempe yells. Giggles, swishing grass, the curling and uncurling of little legs in tight places, and then silence. The silence of little children waiting for something good and terrible all at once. Gotcha makes little hearts beat faster. Well, what do they talk about? I ask. Sex. Told you. And politics and religion and war and freedom. All that. And more when they get riled up. Is that what you do at night? Go down and listen to the hired hands talk? Sometimes. The words fall out and I can't do nothing to get them back. Tempe looks down when she answers. Tempe can't hold her lies any more than old Mrs. can hold her liquor. Flash of brown skin and dingy denim. Ready or not, here we come, Tempe shouts. Watson, long brown legs and thin bony arms flail and is already halfway to the porch. He's panting and sweating. His chest pumps hard. I just watch it, glistening. Run. Tempe's long, shapely legs carry her to within inches of Watson. It don't look like she's hardly breathing. She cuts through the yard with hardly no effort at all. It don't seem fair. Tempe can catch her many times she wants. She knows the land and made the rules. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. I tap each little head quickly, dashing from one to the next so I can turn back to the race. There are no tears this time. The little hearts race along with Watson's. Run. Watson is just a few strides ahead of Tempe. If she leans forward just a little more, she'll have him. If not, he'll reach the porch, sanctuary, seconds before her. He slows, and even from the back of his head, I know he's grinning. He zags sharply. You're running the wrong way. I can't get the words out fast enough, but then I see. He isn't running the wrong way at all. The women must have heard the commotion. Armed with broomsticks, they take to the porch in synchronized annoyance. They stand guard. Around back, the men have already stopped talking about the war, escape, and freedom. They're out front, gruff voices whispering, run. Tempe must have seen it then. We all do. Watson isn't running for the porch. Tempe stops. She stands still whispering, run, 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 along with everybody else. Watson never stops running. I wish he had taken me with him.
I can definitely see why you got the gig as the narrator. Yvonne, one last question before we let you go, and it's a question we ask all our authors. Why do you think libraries are important?
Oh my gosh, they are such magical places. And I feel like when I say that, so first, of course, the reminder that magical places take real people to make them run. And so while libraries are places where stories happen, where stories live, where there are answers and questions, where there are so many possibilities. It's been one of the most welcoming spaces that I've ever encountered. I've gone to libraries pretty much my entire life. Whenever there's, I go there to read for pleasure. I go there to find books. I go there when I don't know what I'm looking for, but I just need something. I go there when I need a story. When I need to be told a story, like when I need a new book or when I need to find an old one, I go to libraries. When I first became a mom, I took my kids to libraries. They're, you know how people have rites of passage? My kids have always been getting their own library cards. It's just like, it's what we do. I have so many library cards, but but I also respect, and I think there's this part of me that I'm just like, oh my gosh, like when we go to a new place or we go to a visit, I love going in the libraries. There's just something about, like, for me, I feel like you can tell a lot about a community by their library and how welcoming it is, the books on the shelves. If people invite you to like ask questions, or when you ask questions, the answers that they give, and all of these things I think are possible in libraries, but I can't say that without saying that libraries need like our help and they need support. They need people to use them, but they also need people to invest time and money in them, because I've never quite seen anything like I see in the UK as far as libraries. And like, I didn't know that you could close a library. Like, I don't know what, like in my whole life, like back home, I didn't realize that was a possibility until I came to the UK. But likewise, I didn't realize that certain schools didn't have libraries until I came to the UK. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. And so like, taking funding away from libraries means that people in communities, maybe you can't give money, but like go in and see what time you can give, and go in and see what resources and ways that you might be able to help, because clearly libraries can disappear. And I think what we don't want is to be reading stories set 50 years later that talk about these mythical things called libraries, and these mystical places where you can go in and get books for free, and people will ask, you know, give you information, and you can use computers and classes, and you can go to these classes and workshops that are often either free or very low cost, and you can learn like all these different things at amazing libraries. But I really don't want to read books. So we're talking about how they used to be and how they're gone now. And so if we don't want libraries to become fantasy fiction, we're going to have to do something about it. And I guess it's whatever is in your gift to do. If that's voting differently, volunteering and voting, all those different things, it's looking at what you can do. If you haven't been into your local library, I highly recommend it. If your local library is gone, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear it. And second of all, I hope that you can make it to another library and make that other library your home and support it in those ways before that's also gone.
Yeah, it's been an uphill battle making sure that our doors stay open, because we were closed down. We were actually North Harrow Library, and we were one of the libraries that were closed when the council closed, I think, 3 or 4 libraries in our borough. But the reason why we're open today, and the reason why we could talk to you today, is because there was a group of people who really decided that this wasn't good enough and that the people in our area needed better. And they fought for it, and they gave up time, and they gave up just like mental space and mental energy, and they fought for this to be reopened as a community library that was owned and for everyone. And you're absolutely right. It feels like, I'm not very old, but it feels like when I was very young, I couldn't imagine a world that didn't have libraries. And only like 20 years later, it feels like I'm walking and living and moving into a world where that could be a real possibility. And it hasn't been very much time. So you're absolutely right in sort of, if you can support a library in whatever ways, footfall, that's important. Going and borrowing books, that's also important. Donating if you possibly can. I mean, our library depends on donations. We don't get any other funding. So if you're watching this and feel like you can support us in that way, we also have a PayPal link down in the description box. But you can always find a way to support a library, whether that's just by going and borrowing a book and signing up for a library card and sort of saying through that library card that we are here and we use this library, do not take it away from us. So you have that power, whoever it is who's watching this right now. And absolutely, you know, there's such magical places that take real work and real effort and real people to run. And I'm glad that you're here to sort of talk about that and sort of really be aware of that. Yvonne, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for your time. And all the links and stuff will be in the description box below. But thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Your questions were amazing. Thanks for the research and for putting all that time into it and for making this such an engaging, enjoyable conversation. Thank you.
You're so very welcome. It was an absolute joy.